Hello and welcome back, everybody. This is the Decentralized Tech live stream. I am Jon Radoff. I am one of the founders and the CEO of a company called Beamable. We create a tech stack for all of the back end and game server, social systems, economic systems, all the stuff, all the kind of boring stuff, frankly, that you need to run a game so that game developers can do the fun stuff like things people actually care about. But you need this today to run a game. And we're launching a DPIN around it. And I'm super excited today because we have the DPIN of DPINs with us in the room. So this is going to be a really fun conversation. Let's just cut right over to you, Amir. Can we start with just yourself and your own intro? And as I understand it, gaming is part of the backstory here as well, even though maybe not for Helium specifically.
Yeah, I'm Amir, obviously. Started Helium in 2013. Helium is a decentralized wireless network, launched originally to focus on sensors and what has become known as the Internet of Things, and eventually now has grown beyond IoT and is now focused also on mobile networks and a bunch of other stuff coming in the future. But yeah, I was in the gaming world for a very long time. I dropped out of college and worked at a company called DICE. We built Battlefield 1942. I was also I was a world champion Quake 3, and Unreal Tournament player at some point in my life. So I was one of the first sort of esports pros on the western side of the world. It was all very big in Korea at the time, and there was no one in the West. So yeah, I appreciate what you're doing with Beamable, and have quite a lot of experience in that industry.
Yeah, exciting. We look forward to the day when games like Battlefield run on top of Beamable. So that would be exciting. Amir, let's dive right into Helium, though. So I think a lot of the folks who watch this program from me regularly have heard of Helium for sure. So, but maybe for that 1% of the people that don't know yet, maybe just a slightly expanded introduction. But then I really want to understand the backstory. Like, how did this come to be? And then how did it come to be what it is right now?
Yeah, I'll just tie that all together. In 2013, I started the company with Sean Fanning from Napster. And the problem at the time that we were trying to solve is that we had a bunch of friends that were building hardware products, right? So we had one friend that was building like a Fitbit for babies, and we had another guy that was, doing people tracking in like retail areas. And they all were complaining about the same thing, which is like, we have a bunch of these sensors and we think we have a really interesting business opportunity, but there's no way for us to actually like build the thing, because if I wanted to deploy, 100,000 sensors, it's going to cost me, $30 million a month in cell phone bills. And so that was like actually the sort of genesis of Helium, was friends who had a particular problem and that we were trying to help. The Fitbit for babies, for example, that needed to work when it was far away from a phone, but it also needed to be really small, and it also really needed to run on a small battery. And so all of this stuff was sort of really what kind of caused us to start looking at it. And the Internet of Things was very nascent, was starting to become a term that people used and VCs especially used. And so we founded Helium really to try and solve the problem of like, how do you connect small things to the internet? Basically, that was the real purpose of Helium at its launch. I wouldn't say in hindsight that we had a very good plan of like how to actually do that. We knew how to build the technology, and I think we did build a pretty good wireless protocol that did allow for the actual hardware to work. But the real problem, as I think any experienced entrepreneur, and now myself, realizes, is that you've got to figure out how to like actually get distribution on these things, right? Like it's fine to have the technology that works, but if there isn't a broad network that's just available, everywhere, then it's not particularly useful. And we didn't have a great plan for the like, how do we get the network to be everywhere part. And it wasn't really until much later in our life, around 2017, that we were inspired, honestly, by Filecoin, who I think was the first real attempt at a utility token, as they're now sort of thought of in the crypto space, where you had the technology, like they had built the underlying technology, They had a very credible team, and then they had an actual plan for like how they were going to build the sort of crypto-powered version of this, and actually did all those things. And so for us, that was a big inspiration for what became the way people think of Helium now, which is the original idea of like, how do we build a broad network that serves these little devices? But it wasn't really until Filecoin that we were inspired by the notion of like, we can decentralize the economics of this thing. We can let people have ownership of the network themselves, and ultimately create this sort of like cohesive like economic system that allows people to build and operate their own networks. So yeah, definitely credit Filecoin with a ton of like what Helium has now become.
And how's it gone? What do the numbers look like? What's the scale of the network? What do you guys? How happy are you with it?
I mean, never fully happy, but it's it's gone well. I would say. I mean, at its peak, the IoT network was over 1 million hotspots, and so the way people participate in building the network is that they buy these devices called hotspots.
Yep.
And certainly at the time, it was like one of the first attempts at giving normal consumers a way to like mine tokens, right? It was like a consumer hardware kind of product. It looks like a Wi-Fi access point. You plug it in. It creates a network coverage and you get paid, right? And that was kind of the first time, I think, that a normal person that wasn't, like a data center guy or a server operator could like participate in mining crypto using some hardware. So it grew to about 1 million hotspots globally. In 2022, we also launched the mobile version of that network that focuses on primarily cell phones. So that's grown to about 110,000 hotspots. That's in the United States and in Mexico. So I'd say it's gotten pretty big. Like I would say it's done well. The network serves 1.5 million users every day. At peak, transfers 40, 50 terabytes of data every day. But by any reasonable measure, it's been I would say successful and gotten pretty big. But at the same time, also feels incredibly early. Like there's still so much left to do.
Sure. If we think in terms of telecom networks, 1.5 million users daily is still kind of getting started. But from a crypto standpoint, like that's enormous. Like that's a huge number of users who are interacting with it. That said, you just pointed out something really important though, which is I think that for a lot of the users on the network, even the hotspot operators, they don't necessarily think of themselves as like crypto users in any way. In fact, you've had a lot of success with bringing traditional telecom networks into this thing. So I kind of have a couple of questions there for you. One of which is, am I on the right path with you here? Do you think of the end user of this as not necessarily much of a crypto user? And how are you bringing these really these are the biggest companies in the world, some of these telecom companies that you're working with now. So what made them comfortable with getting involved with such a crypto-centric company?
I think sort of two answers, right? Like, so on the network building side, it is still very crypto focused, right? And I'll explain why that's becoming maybe slightly less so. But people that are building the network, that are deploying hotspots, that are earning tokens, like they're very crypto savvy, right? Like that whole world is crypto. Like you earn tokens, they go into a wallet, they understand how that all works. And I think one of the things I'm probably most proud of with Helium is that it did introduce like a whole universe of people to crypto, and I think that's awesome. But on the usage side, which is kind of what you were touching on more there, part of where the like 1 million plus daily users comes from is our partnerships with companies like AT&T and Telefonica, and you've got like T-Mobile users in there and Google Fi is in there, and for them, they don't even have any idea that they're interacting with anything, right? Let alone a crypto network. Like they're just on their phone and they walk into we just announced a thing in Madison Airport, for example, in Wisconsin. So like if you're a AT&T subscriber and you walk into Madison Airport, you end up jumping automatically onto the Helium network. You use the Helium network, and the person operating the hotspots in the airport gets paid in tokens. But the user is none the wiser, right? Like they have no interest perhaps in crypto. They don't even know that that's happening unless they're like really looking in the corner and seeing whether they're on Wi-Fi. And I think that's the right model, honestly, for broad reach. I mean, the crypto universe is still small, especially for things outside of decentralized finance applications, right? Like I think DeFi stuff, people are kind of understand, and there's a universe around that. But for anything outside of like moving tokens and trading them, there aren't that many like crypto applications yet that people interact with. And so our belief has always been we need to make that on the user side like basically non-existent, right? Like it needs to look and feel like anything else. And I think a big part of why is that it can't just be that crypto is the value prop, right? Like if your proposition is I'm doing the same thing as someone else, but I have a token, I don't think that's interesting in the slightest, right? Like the proposition has to be, I can now do something that you couldn't otherwise do, or I couldn't do before because of tokens or because of crypto. And so in the case of something like Helium, we have a cell phone service called Helium Mobile. And one of the things, for example, is there's a free plan, right? Like it's completely free. And that is the kind of thing that you can't do without crypto. But for an end user, they don't really care about the crypto part. They just care about having a good phone plan. And so I think that nuanced difference of like, you know, the value proposition is the token versus the value proposition is like a really good product that happens to be powered by a token is a really important one. And we've definitely like erred heavily on the side of like, we don't think the regular user should know or care about the crypto side.
So we've got a question from our audience here, and it's also a good prompt from me to let everybody here know there's a reason why we do these conversations live, and it's exactly this. It's because we love it when I'm not asking all the questions and you, the community, come in and you get to ask questions. In fact, we did a little experiment yesterday that we're going to repeat again. I think you guys are going to have an easy time of it, frankly, because we've already got 800 people here watching this live. That's awesome. Thanks for tuning in today. Yesterday, I said that we're gamifying the release of our secret code. Everyone wants the secret code that we've got because we've got this leaderboard that people are climbing up because they're hoping to get an airdrop position post TGE. If you want to be on there, you got to score enough points. One of the ways is, hey, participate in the community, be there during live streams, not just video replays. And we're going to give out a code today, but it's only after 5 questions come in from the audience. So we've got the first already. So we're doing great. Like we're only 12 minutes in and we've just kind of gotten past that initial banter phase. So I think the question here that Suman is asking is sustainability of the model. I think this is a general question about DPIN even, which is, I think there's been a lot of DPIN projects. I have separate questions about DPIN as well, but there's just a lot of questions around like supply side getting built way out ahead of demand in a lot of DPIN projects today. Overall performance hasn't necessarily been that great on a lot of DPIN projects, and a lot of them have just struggled. But I think maybe how can we take Suman's question to think about like what are those things that you've either learned along the way or were foundational into Helium to make this something truly sustainable? Because you guys have sustainability. You've done it for years now. So congratulations on that. But you're also going to keep being around, forever, we hope, right? So talk to this.
I mean, you need a sustainable demand side is the bottom line, right? Like none of this really works in the long term unless there's someone paying money somewhere in the equation, right? And I think it's sort of that simple at the end of the day, right? And I think with Helium IoT, that was much more on the speculative side, right? Like IoT was not an industry that had really gone anywhere or done anything. And part of the belief was that if you had built a network or a network existed, then you would start to see more IoT applications. And I think that is happening. It's just really, really slow. The mobile side is easier because, easier and harder at the same time. It's easier in the sense that like you don't have to guess at what the application is. Right. With IoT, everyone was always like, what's the killer app in IoT? Is it like tracking devices? Is it, wildfire sensors? Like it could be, all kinds of like interesting answers, but none of them have really like taken hold the way something like a smartphone has taken hold, right? Where there are like billions of these things. And so you don't have to guess at like, what am I building a network for? Like it is for smartphones, and like where do smartphones have like the biggest issues for coverage? Indoors, like predominantly, right? It's in indoor spaces. It's also the areas where it's hardest for like big telcos to like deploy coverage. and also happens to be the easiest place for like a community to build coverage, right? It's much easier to put a hotspot inside a restaurant than like go mount it on a big tower somewhere outdoors. So I think really it comes down to like, is there a problem to solve or not, right? Like, is there actually a problem you're trying to solve, or are you just building cool stuff? And there's a place for building cool stuff for sure. I mean, a lot of like great solutions come out of that. But with crypto, it's tricky because I don't think most participants in those markets are aligned for like super long term, right? Like DeFi especially has just trained you. Like, I'm at 100x leverage, and this thing is either making me like 400% in the next hour, or I'm out, right? And with something like DePIN networks, it's like they're going to take years to build out and to really get to scale. And so I think I've called it in the past, like this duration mismatch, I think is a really fascinating problem. And I don't have a great solution for it other than like you need someone paying money on the other side, like someone has to buy your services. And that's not always true either, right? Like you look at some of the like top 100 coins, like I couldn't even tell you what they're for or like if anyone ever uses them, yet somehow some of these things have like multi-billion-dollar market caps. So it doesn't always make sense, but I think trying to like model yourself after like, I don't know, Ripple or something like that is very dangerous just because Ripple's kind of like unique. So I think ultimately you want to try and get to a place where like you're really solving a problem, you know exactly who the customer is, and you have some sense of like what they're going to pay you for what you're doing. And if you don't have those things, I think it gets really tricky really quickly.
So I have some interesting things maybe to share about this, and then continue to get your thoughts on it. But first of all, the fundamental business that we at Beamable are in, which is providing backend as a service for game developers. So for people that missed the first 30 seconds here, it's backend servers, it's social systems, it's economic systems, blockchain integration for Web3 games. Of course, we're mostly not Web3. Most of our game studios are traditional game studios, some large ones all the way down to tiny indies. But it's all the things you need in the cloud and on servers to operate your game. And there's a really big problem in our business. It turns out that it's just a challenge to build this business. And that is, it costs a lot of capital to actually build this technology because it isn't actually super straightforward. You were at DICE, I'm sure that you saw just like multiplayer servers, tournaments, matchmaking, building it all yourself. It can add up over time. But we have to also make that available to everybody. But on top of that, games don't ship fast. So people start building on our product. And when we talk about like customer life cycle, it can be, I mean, best case, maybe a year for a mobile game, but like PC or console games, you're talking several years from someone saying, hey, we would love to use the Beamable platform, to now they're scaling up and actually paying because it's usage-based. And the main reason people come to us is it's capital efficient, right? So they don't want to spend a bunch of capital up front to build it. They're not going to hire us like consultants. They just want to use a platform that they pay as they use. So it does take a long time to do that. Now, fast forward to about a year ago when Bitcraft told us that they would love to lead our Series A because we were going to take that tech stack and deploy it as a DePIN network. The interesting thing, which relates back to what you're saying about demand, is they thought it was very exciting that we were a crypto project, quote unquote project, that had revenue, right? Because we have, like today, we have about 100 live games on the platform, a couple million players per month playing the games, and they're all revenue generating. This is capital coming into Beamable, funding that, and we can move all of that over to the DePIN. So they loved the fact that we had this built-in demand for the DePIN that we're launching, but also it turns out it's also a double-edged sword within crypto, because as soon as you start talking about purely aspirational dreamlands that you want to be at, and you're actually held to things like traditional KPIs as if like a normal company, then it actually is almost a turnoff to certain kind of people that would be interested from the crypto investing standpoint. So it's interesting for me, just having been through a company that was hard to build because of that time differential problem that you were talking about, but also now being crypto with so much to offer in terms of like the business fundamentals, that itself kind of is the challenge. I agree with your premise, though, which is if you're building a DePIN without a fairly interesting way to either start with demand or build demand quickly, then supply is just going to race out of control and dilute the token. And before you know it, you don't really have anything sustainable. So
yeah, no, I think also, I mean, you also have to keep doing good storytelling is the other thing, right? Like I think that's true of, you know, public companies, and like Tesla's a great example, right? I mean, or SpaceX or any of those. Like Tesla may be a car company today, but you always get the sense that like that is actually not what their ultimate state is going to be, right? Like they're going to be on Mars building like rovers or something, right? And you know, and so like having this like very aspirational end state, I think is really, really important. And also, you know, like I was just chatting with like some members of the Chainlink community the other day. It's a perfect example, right? Where again, like they have been able to tell like a very big story about, and Ripple to some degree as well. I just have like less understanding of Ripple. Like they've been able to tell a very big story about like what Chainlink is for, right? It's like interoperability between blockchains or whatever their main pitch is. And that has allowed them to like continue to like dream big and get people excited, even when like, you know, if you looked at like on-chain revenues, that they're not very big, right? And so it is important to do both. And I think like, and it's probably an area honestly where I think Helium we haven't done that extremely well. If I'm fair, is that we have focused very much on the numbers, and while that's great, it also does ground everything in this very like, this is what it looks like today way, rather than like, you know, we're building, you know, something massive for the future. And so, and it's hard in crypto, you know, especially over the last administration, you know, it was very difficult to know what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, like what dreams are you allowed to talk about without, you know, crossing into the danger zone. And
now we can
you know,
talk. I guess I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean it's still a mystery, but it's
Trump coin is sort of like the bar for that we all have to accomplish. Then I guess.
I mean that's the hard part. That's part of the hard part, right? Is that like it's just straight up crime on one side. Yeah, but I don't think you can actually do that if you're, you know, one of us. So
when the president does it, it's not a crime, I think was from Frost Nixon.
Yeah. So there's still questions around like how are you supposed to like, you know, talk about yourself and market yourself, and you know, so that continues to be hard. But I do think it's important. Like the sort of key point is, yes, it's good to have metrics. But they can't just be like the only thing that people think about. And again, you look at like some of the more successful like public companies, like they aren't just about like what are they doing today. It's also like what does the future look like, and ultimately people are buying what they believe the future looks like. And I think it's really important to be able to tell that story well.
Another part of your journey was the transition over to Solana as a blockchain, and some of our audience is a little bit technical or curious about chains and things like that. So I would love you to just talk a little bit about that, the transition from kind of building your own stuff to deciding to move to Solana, and why Solana specifically. And I should say Beamable is a Solana project. We support like 10 different chains from a game studio standpoint. Use whatever chain you want, but the chain that our DePIN is deploying on is Solana, and I'm also happy to share why we chose that. But let's start with your thinking around that.
When we launched Helium, we started building really in 2017 or 2018. So there wasn't that much around in terms of, you know, smart contract platforms really. Like you I think would have had to build what looks like an Ethereum L2 basically would probably have been the best way to do it. You certainly couldn't have done it on the L1, at least not the way that we had designed it. So at the time, like we made the decision, for better or for worse, to build our own blockchain.
To translate, I think you couldn't be paying $50 gas fees just to give someone some tokens for.
There are a lot of transactions in the Helium protocol, and like you could batch them all and, you know, sort of treat it like an L2, and maybe that would have been the right thing to do. But we made the decision, like I said, for better or for worse, to do it ourselves, and it was fine. It's you know, you get to this point where it's a lot of work to maintain your own infrastructure, and at some point you're like, well, I don't know why I'm actually doing this anymore. And it only really got to that point where it's like, why are we doing this when other viable options became available? And one of those was Solana. Like we have known that team for a really long time. So like part of the funny story of that is like we tried to hire Anatoly to work at Helium before he started Solana, because he had worked with our CTO when they were at Qualcomm together. So we had a lot of history with them, and we knew them very well, and we trusted them. But unfortunately, at the time, they were just too early. Right? We were both startups trying to launch a project. We launched roughly at the same time. But as time went on, and especially I got tired of like maintaining a blockchain, because really, I mean, we're about users and companies and data flowing. Like I don't really care that much like what the underlying infrastructure is. In the same way that I don't think someone playing a video game cares whether it's on the Unity engine or on a Frostbite engine. Like no one cares, right? Like it either works well or it doesn't work well, and that's sort of the bottom line, right? And so once Solana, I think, had gotten to a point where there was a big ecosystem there, like they survived, they battled through like the hardest possible time, and I think that equip them really, really well to come out winning. Basically, a lot of these companies have never gone through like difficult periods of time, and I think it shows. And so once the chain had gotten very stable, once the DeFi ecosystem had grown, exchanges were starting to support SPL tokens, like all the stuff that we thought was important. We decided to just make the switch, and Solana was the easiest choice of all. Like once you've made the decision to switch, I personally don't think there were very many reasonable options. Like people were coming out of the woodwork, like, why didn't you build on, SafeMoon or whatever? I'm like, come on, man. It's like I even know what they were talking about blockchains I don't even know existed, right? And so, but once the decision was made to like switch to Solana, I think the list of reasons why was exhaustive and long, and been super happy with that. And Anatoly and Raj and the rest of the team they're still in the trenches like every single day. Like working with teams and like literally just chatting with Anatoly right now on Signal, and like like it's a great universe to be in, because everyone involved is like deeply motivated to like make it succeed, and I think they also look at it from the lens of like the way it succeeds is that like applications should win, and I think that's a very important distinction between like we're building cool computer science projects versus we're trying to build a important piece of infrastructure that people use. So yeah, I think we've enjoyed it, very much appreciate it. There's obviously stuff we would change if we could, like it does start, even at Solana's low cost, things do start to get expensive when the cost of Sol is high, and you're moving a lot of transactions the way we do. But overall, it's been fantastic. No complaints.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly like the very low transaction costs of Solana, and also the fact that they have just so much scale. I wrote an article about this a few weeks ago around Wright's law in Solana, and kind of if you graph like total transaction volume of all chains, and you put that on one axis, and on the other axis you put transaction costs, Solana is so far up to the right. Like, yes, there are some newer chains that also promise or have very good performance, but to have actually done it at scale and to sustain that scale is a really good proof of the technology. And we couldn't really afford to do it on, I've already forgotten the name of the weird chain that you referred to. I don't know that one either. But we couldn't afford to do that. That was one. Another is, speaking of Anatoly, I remember fondly the 3 year ago conversation where Anatoly listened to the pitch on Beamable long before we even knew we were going to be a DPIN, because Solana really wanted to invest in their ecosystem. And a lot of chains, particularly in the gaming market, who want to attract games, a lot of them kind of pay lip service to wanting games there, and they want it for the reason, which is games could drive transactions, and transactions flow through the network and drive more potential value for the underlying economics of the chain. So I get why they want games, but when it really comes down to it, very few of them will invest in ecosystem to make that happen. They just want people to magically show up because the performance metrics they claim are going to be really good. But Anatoly heard our pitch on Beamable and what we wanted to accomplish for games, and the fact that we were already supporting blockchain games as an ecosystem. So we've always been just a big fan of Solana and their team and sort of their interest in ecosystem. And then about a year ago, when we were thinking through like, well, what chain are we going to deploy our DPIN on? We actually spoke to Abe, and he convinced us of the strength of just the Solana ecosystem around DPIN generally. And we got into looking at some of the open source work that the Helium team had done. And immediately we were like, our CTO is like, these guys are just, generally speaking, the code base that's being deployed to Helium for DPIN is very far along compared to everything else. And I think, frankly, Solana is the chain of choice for DPIN launches today. That's my personal decision there.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, and we made that decision to switch, and it was looking grim for Solana at the time. Like the token was down at $8 or so. But it was never really about that for us. It was like, does the thing fundamentally like do what we need it to do, and is there a good community of people around it, including the founding team? And frankly, the fact that we know the founding team well and can like reach them, it matters to us, right? Like if ever there was a disastrous situation, and maybe that's unfair, but it also just is the way it is. And I do think Solana has done a fantastic job of surviving. It's always funny as you were talking, it's like every now and then you'll see someone post something and people in the replies will be like, Algorand has never gone down or anything like that. And no offense to like Algorand, but it's like, it's easy to have the metrics and the statistics and the figures when you don't have any load, right? When there's no users using your thing, everything works great, right? Like we know this, but to actually have done it in production at like massive scale, dealing with like Trump coin launches and stuff like that, that's a different story. And so like, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be said about the fact that they've been through the wars and kind of understand what it takes to like really make this thing survive at scale. I think there's not very many chains, in fact, maybe no chains that really fit that criteria.
So King 7up, thanks for your question. I'm curious your thoughts on this. What happens to Helium if there is Solana congestion? I mean, we've seen it happen a few times. Hopefully it'll never happen again. But does Helium go down? Can people use it? What's the status there?
No, I mean, everything largely continues to work fine. Token transactions end up being delayed is kind of the simplest version.
For your hotspot.
Yeah. Delayed.
The
payment that's right. It's almost like a store and forward type system, right? Where it's just going to sit there, and once the chain is back or the fees are back to a reasonable number or whatever the form of the like problem is, then things will continue. And we thought it was, and so it is a little bit L2-ish in design that way, right? Where we thought it was important to keep a bunch of stuff off chain for exactly these kinds of reasons. It's more efficient, it's faster. There's some redundancy built into it that way. But yeah, that's not two things. I mean, one, it's not a thing that happens very often. I know Solana had a reputation for a while of always going down or whatever, but I don't think there's been a major outage or anything for some time now.
It wasn't as nearly as terrible as people pointed out. A lot of that was FUD.
Yeah, and to Toli's point, it's like, like if you're trying to use something like Ethereum, sometimes the fees are like $50 a transaction. I think I've had it at times when it's like $180 was probably the worst screenshot I have of like trying to do like a DeFi transaction of some kind. And it's like that's basically down, right? Like I'm not going to pay $180, or like the chain is basically down at that point, as far as anyone is reasonably concerned. So it's been pretty reliable. I don't really have that problem, but if we do have that problem, like that's how we mitigate it, is that we remember everything basically, and then once the chain is back, everything gets processed.
Yeah, very similar to us. So don't worry, everybody. If Solana had congestion or even went down, it's not a global game outage for all the games that are running on Beamable. That side of things has nothing to do with token transactions, but similarly, there could be a delay in payment. Maybe you have to wait a few hours or a day before it catches up and you get paid the tokens that you're owed. So you will get paid. You just wait a little bit longer and it'll catch up. But there's nothing that affects the games there.
Yeah,
so
no, the service continues as normal. Like no one would even, users would never notice, right? Like everything carries on. Perhaps hotspot owners get paid a little bit later, but the user side of things are never affected.
Mm-hmm. So we've got another question here from Crypto, and I want to remind everybody we got to get 2 more questions in before we're going to release that code, and you guys have 25 minutes to do it. So we're going to start to introduce game design, time pressure. You got time pressure here, or I don't know, you might not release the code today. So guys, you got one of the world leading experts in DePIN and fair to say, I think crypto just generally. So ask your questions. We got a great guest here in Amir. So Crypto's question is, now that other companies are building similar networks, what makes Helium special? Is it the technology, the size of the network, or is it your community? I think I slightly question the premise about building similar networks, but feel free to react to that. But what I like about this question is, what do you think the moat of your platform is?
I mean, ultimately, it's users. I know that's not a very exciting answer, but
The old-fashioned
honestly,
answer.
I mean, it is it's like what makes Amazon special, right? Like you could build a shopping experience that looked exactly the same with a better website, but it's nothing to do with that, right? And so, some part of it obviously is technology, like it has to work. It has to be functional, but I do think the bar for that is significantly lower now than when we first built Helium. Was an extraordinary amount of work with a massive amount of expertise needed. I think that bar has gone down a lot, so I don't think the technology itself is particularly unique. We've open sourced practically everything we've ever done, so it's difficult to say that that's a moat of any kind. Certainly the size matters, like the fact that there's a big community, the fact that the network itself is very large. I think those things do matter. But at the end of the day, like it is the non-fun stuff, which is the like acquiring users, making them happy, convincing them to give you money for products that you're selling. That is really the hard part. I've used this quote before, but like there's a relatively like well-known startup quote, which is that first-time founders are focused on product and second-time founders are focused on distribution. And I think that is exactly correct. Like you need a good product too, but the hard part is exactly like how do you get people to use it? And that is like full credit most of the time to our marketing team. Like they are on the front line of acquiring users and customers 24/7, learning about what works and what doesn't work and adjusting it and tweaking it. And it isn't, for someone like me that enjoys building stuff, it's not that exciting relatively, right? Like it is like, I'm going to try this ad and I'm going to see how many people click on it. I'm going to try this ad and see if more people click on that one, and so it's a lot of like that kind of iterative work. So yeah, I mean, I think we've done a really good job of acquiring users and making them happy and keeping them around and causing them to like want to continue to use Helium, and that is the hardest part.
So we have another question from earlier on, actually, just about sort of expansion plans around the world. You already have a pretty impressive footprint around the world. I think, Oscar, earlier you might have been showing that global map. Otherwise, maybe we bring it up here. But Sui Bagzer, I don't know if that means Sui. Are you a big fan of Sui? I mean, we love them too, by the way. We support them. I mean, we have a lot of great games on Sui building on top of us. And there was a related question that I saw from someone as well, like asking, I won't flash it on the screen quite at the moment, but like, John, why are you only on Solana? We're on Solana for the DePIN, but we support every chain that all our customers want to use. We are completely chain agnostic. If someone's building a blockchain game, they want to be on Sui, Solana, Ethereum mainnet, go for it. Like we'll support whatever chain you think is the one that you should be on. But Sui's question here is like 5G mobile data expansion plans around that for places like the Philippines.
I mean, we want to, right? And I think what we did in Mexico is a good example of that. And what we did in Mexico was partner with Telefonica. If you don't know who Telefonica is, like a gigantic, like Spanish-based telco, it's like the AT&T of Spain, and they have a subsidiary in Mexico. And the problem that they have in Mexico is that it was very expensive for them to operate infrastructure. They don't want to keep doing that anymore. So we worked with them for some time, like building out areas with hotspots and sort of seeing how well it worked. And then now all of the Telefonica users in Mexico are about to get turned on to start using Helium, I think in September, actually. So it's actually coming up, which is amazing. But that is what I think you need in other countries too. You need like someone to like operate someone that has the user base, right? Like we don't think we can just wander into a country that we don't know anything about, like the Philippines, and build an equivalent of Helium Mobile and acquire customers there, like not knowing anything about the market, right? Like we're not that arrogant. And so the way that we would want to do it, I think, is to try and partner with someone in the Philippines that is doing that, and offer them something of value. Like, is there value for Helium being in the Philippines or being in whatever country? And if the answer is yes, then we would love to do something. What I think we want to avoid is just like selling hardware into a country with like no plan for it ever being used. I think everyone gets, that doesn't work well for anyone. So that's kind of how we think about it, is that we'd love to be in every country in the world, but we also want to be kind of sane about it and only deploy in those countries where there is actual demand and there are actual users to start using the network.
I got to give a shout out to whoever's running your Helium account out there as well on X. They are right on the ball, watching the stream, posting as we go. So nice work on your marketing department there.
Intern doing good work over there.
So there's another question from Crypto here, around just sort of like, are you basically competing with the same telecom networks that you are forming partnerships with? His premise here is that your plans are cheaper than some of these guys like T-Mobile. First of all, is that actually true? I haven't done a price comparison myself, but how do you think about competition of your plan versus these other partners that are helping you grow?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, honestly. I mean, quite frankly, we're like just too tiny as a cell phone service to really be competitive with someone like AT&T, right? I mean, they've got like 200 million subscribers or something, and we have 400,000. And so, we hope to get there. And I'm sure, similar to like Uber and like taxi cab companies, like once the scale happens, like the conversations are going to be very different. I'm sure between, if Helium Mobile has 50 million subscribers, then I'm sure there's going to be a different type of conversation that we're having with AT&T. But for now, I mean, I guess it just comes back to the same thing. I think we provide a service of value to AT&T, and they are interested in using it as a result of it being valuable to them, right? And so at some point there might be, more attention there, but I think we've got a long way to go before that happens. And, I think, like I said, these... Like Uber is always a decent example to me, right? Like it's, I don't think anyone in the taxi cab industry took Uber seriously. Like it was a joke and a toy, and like what about if this happens? And then at some point it's not, right? And all of a sudden your industry is like destroyed by this like little startup that came out of nowhere. But I think it's a little bit different in telecom. Like it's harder to do that, to have that same effect. It's just a little bit slower. But at the same time, like I said, I think eventually everyone will realize that like deploying networks the way Helium does it is the right way to do it. And I think it's great credit to like guys like AT&T and T-Mo for wanting to like experiment with that very early on, right? Like does that work well for them or not? I think puts them in a really great position, because I do think it's inevitable. Like, it doesn't make sense to spend tens or hundreds of billions of dollars building networks the old way anymore. And I think everyone kind of, whether that's because of satellites or because of things like Helium, like that whole industry is going to be changing and evolving like very, very rapidly. And so I think it's great that the bigger companies are willing and interested in like, trying that.
William has an interesting observation here. And yes, we did hit 5 out of 5 questions, so I'm going to release the code. So bear with me, but I want to plant a little seed here, because William had an interesting point related to what you were saying, which is he believes that Helium is actually going to drive the average cost of cell phones down. And I'm wondering if that's something you think is true or will happen. I will say that for me in my business, that is one of our goals for our DeepIn. We think game studios spend way too much on server infrastructure. Last year, Roblox spent almost 40% in some quarters on just infrastructure. It's insane how much game studios can actually get blown away by some of these costs. And that means you have a lot of people who can't be competitive at all or launch an innovative game. So we think costs should come down, and DeepIn is something that can do that because of its ability to essentially take energy costs, CapEx costs, distributed around the world, and allow independent operators to just make the decision of whether they can provide a service. In our case, they get to price the service. So it's a little bit different than your structure, but let me give the code, and then we'll ask you to give your thoughts on the macroeconomics of DeepIn as well as Helium specifically. So the code today is wireless. You can imagine how we thought of this code. WIRELESS. So to get that, you got to go to our Discord, type /claim, and then you enter wireless as your code. You have 2 minutes to do that. So if you miss the 2-minute window, you're watching this in replay, get in Discord first, be ready to claim it. That's how you earn points towards the current and last season of the airdrop stuff that we're doing, because TGE is coming relatively soon, although we haven't said when. It's soonish. So wireless, go get that code, everybody. All right, Amir, let's come back to the question here. Macroeconomics of DeepIn, what does it do to costs? What does it do for Helium specifically?
I mean, it should, over time, I think that's right? Like I do think over time, things like Helium will cause the cost of connectivity to go down. I think that's going to take a while. And the reason it'll take a while is that a lot of the infrastructure that guys like the MNOs like AT&T and T-Mobile and Verizon are using are on very long schedules, right? Like some of these things are like, decades long leases, for example, for like tower space. And so even though an alternative exists like Helium, it's just going to take a while in some cases for them to like get out of their existing setups, to feel comfortable with the fact that Helium is, around long term. And there probably will be, several Heliums that feel it can't be won by like a single, entity. It's too large. But I do think that's going to happen. And you kind of saw it, like if you're in the telecom space or even know much about it, a thing called a tower company started to exist like a while ago. And those are companies like American Tower and Crown Castle. And they are basically real estate companies that go around buying land and like putting big towers on them and then leasing access to the towers back to like guys like AT&T. And so I think of Helium more as like almost like an evolution of like a tower company to some degree, right? Like it's a sort of neutral host. And by neutral host, I mean like anyone should be able to use it, like any of the networks should be able to use it. But I do think it'll take time. But I hope that that's right. Like in the end state, I hope that things like Helium have caused the cost of connectivity to go down across the board. And for Helium Mobile, which is our own version of the service, like we think that happens right away, right? Because we don't have any of that legacy. We don't have any decades long leases or like OpEx or CapEx that we have to deal with. So, but yeah, that's exactly the purpose of Helium, and certainly what I hope happens.
So we got the Helium intern there saying DeepIn is inevitable. I'm curious how you think about this term DeepIn, because this term is something that came about after you started Helium. You mentioned Filecoin earlier. A lot of people put Filecoin in the DeepIn category. I don't know. To me, I think Bitcoin could arguably be DeepIn. It's run hardware, get a token out is what Bitcoin is. What is this category? Do you like being in a category that you didn't necessarily create on your own, that just sort of happened to us? And then I'll have
I shouldn't say it, but I kind of hate it, honestly, because of exactly what you said, right? It's like, if it spans everything from Bitcoin to Helium, then I'm not sure what it means. Like everything runs on hardware, right? Like there's no such thing as any internet thing that doesn't involve hardware, and so I think it's become way too broad. I mean, like our version of like what DePIN means is this like very physical instantiation of networks that involves like geography. And Bitcoin doesn't really fit that to some extent, right? Like you could put the entire Bitcoin network in a big warehouse and it would continue to, like, it would be bad in terms of like centralization.
Meteor hits it, but other than that,
and security and yeah, but you could, and the same with Filecoin, right? Like it's a file storage network. It doesn't matter that much where the devices are. Like yes, there's latency and ideally would be distributed geographically, but it doesn't have to be. Whereas with something like Helium, like it only works if it's distributed that way. And so for me, that's what it stands for. And obviously I'm biased because that's exactly what we built. But I think if it doesn't stand for that, then it comes to mean everything. And if it means everything, then it's kind of useless. And once people start adding Bitcoin into the equation and other stuff, then I think you've lost the whole. Then like I said, I don't know I couldn't think of a single crypto network that isn't a DePIN at that point, right? Because there is hardware involved, like in running every single one of these things. And like is Solana a DePIN? There are validators that run them. Like it starts to get silly as far as I'm concerned. And so I don't love it just because I think it has grown to mean almost anything. I don't love it just because there's a lot of like sort of copycat, relatively worthless projects in that category also. Like I don't know.
Let's go with that though. What's wrong with DePIN right now? And I know we can both share a hatred of the chief marketing officer of Web3 who needs to get fired for coming up with all these terms. What's wrong with
it's the same thing as crypto in general. I mean, there's a lot of like solutions looking for problems, and it's made worse in a way in DePINs because you often have a hardware thing, and so there's opportunity for like this sort of hardware scam style of behavior, and I think we've certainly seen many of those where people sell hardware, they never deliver it, or it's like wildly overpriced, or whatever it might be. And I understand the allure. I mean, like, had we done that, we would have generated, $1 billion plus in revenue, but we actually didn't make any money from any of our hardware sales because we wanted the network to grow bigger. So I understand like why it sort of has an appeal to it, but it can go wrong like so in so many ways. I can't remember what I was looking at. I was looking at some light sensor device that I saw on Twitter the other day that was selling for $400, and it was, at most like $5 or $6 worth of parts. And I think I replied with a sad face to whatever it was. But so I think that isn't great, and it is because like people are like really searching, and I don't fault people for searching. I think a big part of a startup's journey is trying to find. Someone defined like a company as like a group of individuals searching for product market fit, and I think that's probably a pretty good way of thinking about what a company does. And one of the hard parts of doing it in crypto is that you do it out in the open, in public, taking people's money in the process, right? And it can. Most people are not accredited investors that are comfortable with the risk of their thing going to zero. And I think that's one of the differences between like private startup investing and like what you saw in the ICO era is that, if I angel invest in a startup or a VC invests in a startup, like I've written it to zero immediately, like the second you give the money away, right? Like that if anything comes back, it's like great, but in my head, it's like it's zero. And I don't think that's how a normal human thinks, right? That the VCs are in the business of like making high risk investments. And I don't think normal people are. And I think it's one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest mismatches with like things like ICOs and to some degree like hardware sales in startups is that you just don't know. Like the startup selling you the hardware doesn't know either. It's not like they necessarily even had any malice involved. They just, they just don't know. Like they're on a journey. And sometimes the journey works out great, and most of the time it doesn't. And I think that can be really difficult for people to go along with.
So you've done some angel investing when it comes to crypto projects. What do you look for in the team, the idea, whether it's DePIN broadly or the whole crypto market? I'm just curious.
I've definitely ended up investing in a lot of DePIN stuff, mostly because DePIN founders come to me because of Helium. Like so, like that has sort of naturally. I don't consider myself a good investor by any means. But I think the idea has to be interesting in some way, and that's not a good enough criteria, by the way. That's why I would never make a good VC. But I think if it's if you're trying to do something interesting and the team is credible and, or at least appears credible, then great. Like I'm all for it. And I love to like try and get involved in stuff where I think there's like real tangible value that can be added to something, and it's not just a copycat of something else. Now, again, I'm not saying that copycats are bad. Like some of the greatest businesses in the world were just copies of other things done better.
Yeah.
But that for me personally doesn't really move the needle for me. And so I'm a lot of the stuff, like it's in my Twitter bio, like I have all the different things I'm invested in, and or at least some of them. And I think the general theme is like something new and novel and interesting, and where I like the team, or I think the team is capable of doing the thing, or in some cases where they're like almost certain to succeed, and I'm fortunate to like have gotten in is the other criteria. So yeah, but overall I like people trying to do interesting things, and like I said, I know they're high risk. I'm okay with it all going to zero if that's what happens, but I think some of them are going to do very well.
So you've gotten a bunch of DePIN founders coming to you. What, other than the demand piece that we talked about a little bit earlier, the importance of demand in this business, what advice do you share with DePIN founders generally?
I mean, roughly what I've said here. You know what I mean? Like
it's mostly.
I think for myself included, like I think we gravitate towards interesting technology, and that is not always the right thing to gravitate towards, right? Like I said, that a lot of the work is really kind of, for people like me, fairly boring, right? Like, how do you acquire users? Like, where are the users? Like, who are you selling to? Like, what's the message? If you're selling to an enterprise, like who is the title inside the enterprise that makes the decision to buy? And like, how do you get to that person? And that stuff is, like I said, it's not as exciting as like I'm building a new consensus protocol that does X, Y, and Z. It's like a very different type of work. And I think it's why, like, startup teams evolve over time, and you rarely end up at the later stage with the same team you had at the start. Is that, the group of people that's interested at the start of like coming up with cool stuff is not necessarily interested in like, okay, how do I increase my ARPU from like, $18 to $22? Is not the same level of problem or the same kind of problem, and is a completely different type of person. So yeah, I try and give them the boring advice, which is that I don't think anyone cares about your technology, and it's is this solving a problem for someone, and are they willing to give you money for it? And if the answer to that is yes, then great, you probably do really, really well. If the answer is you don't know, that's also okay, but I think there's that should make you cautious about going too deep on building the technology until you kind of know the answer to that question. And the good thing that's happened over time is that because of stuff like Solana, or in the gaming world, things like Unity, you can now much more quickly like prototype a thing, right? You don't have to build the whole game engine like we did in Battlefield from scratch, right? Because like you can now build a thing relatively quickly and try it and see what works, and then refine it. But again, it's a different kind of thing. It's less exciting than like, we're going to go heads down and we're going to build, some incredibly exotic solution to like, peer-to-peer networks or something. Is it just a very different kind of thing? And I would just always try and advise people to like do the boring part too, which is like, who's going to pay for this?
Yeah. And now if you can pull a 3D engine off the shelf, a backend off the shelf, now we've got vibe coding, you start prototyping whole multiplayer game experiences in minutes, maybe. So that's kind of what we see coming, is all of the infrastructure piece, all the tech pieces that really did give people an edge back in the day of game development. It used to be that having a great tech team that could invent something new would give you the ability to launch the kind of game that no one had ever seen before. It's not really like that in the game industry anymore now. It's really about the story, the experience, the immersion, the rules, the game system, like what really pulls people in. And any time off of that's spent on tech for the 100,000th time is just kind of a waste of capital and time. So that's why we're here, to do the boring stuff, as you said it. Amir, this has been a really awesome conversation. We're coming right up at the end of the hour. I want to really thank you for being part of this, because I'm a huge fan of what Helium's been doing. It's great to have you on this and hear some of your wisdom about the market. If you're watching this and you don't know Helium yet, where do they go?
Helium.com.
Helium.
That's the yeah, we are fortunate to own all the Helium names and domains. So yeah, helium.com, heliummobile.com if you're interested in signing up for cell service with us. And obviously our Twitter, as you called out, is pretty up to date, and we're always talking about something on there. But thanks very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
It is a pleasure. Follow Amir, follow me, follow Helium, follow Beamable Network. We'd love to see all of you online. And thanks to you, the community who hung out with us here for the last hour. Your time's super valuable. And there's 3,000 of you here watching live. So we're delighted that you showed up to be part of this community, ask your questions, and learn along with me today. So until next time, we'll see you. Amir, thanks for taking part again.